Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Meeting with Publishers. Thank you so much for joining me today for this informational meeting about the 2021 North Carolina textbook evaluation and adoption process. You will receive a lot of information today, but do know that the slide deck will be posted on the web page, and I will also send that out to you through the Publishers Registry, along with some other information that I'll be sharing with you today. We will have some time at the end for Q&A, but you will need to note that questions are being required in written format, so I'll make another comment about that at the end. The meeting will be recorded, so please keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to do and we only have a little bit of time. So I do appreciate you joining, and hopefully you'll find the information that I'm sharing today with you very helpful. So we'll first start by looking at the agenda. Hopefully everybody had access to the agenda through the meeting. If not, it is on the website. And also I sent information about the agenda items with the last message that you received about the meeting. We'll talk about the overview of the textbook adoption process. We'll look at the bid submission process, which includes information about the new NC site for publishers. We'll talk a little bit about evaluation, do an overview of the 2021 invitation, and then finally we'll have a closing. So let's start by taking a look at the overall process for adoption. First, let's start by recognizing that North Carolina does have a definition for textbook, and this definition is very broad because it's inclusive of things that may be print materials as well as things that are non-print materials, things that may be technology-based, things that may require the use of electronic equipment. So going into that a little bit more, the idea of non-print materials, those may be subscriptions that might be web or subscription-based, and also, again, technology-based materials that would be a basic learning resource, but it may require some type of electronic equipment for students to be able to access. So the textbook adoption process flows this way. We start off with our invitation, and as you all may know, I sent the message out last week after the state board approved of the invitation at their March 4th meeting. So this was sent out to you on March the 5th. And that is our call letter for publishers to submit bids containing all the information and details that outline what has to happen in order for you to participate in that process. After the invitation goes out, and a lot of things happen after that point, evaluation will occur in the summertime. And this is the review for the alignment of materials to standards and to quality criteria. And that part of the process will involve advisors, it will involve the textbook commissioners. And so there's a lot that happens in between those two steps. And then finally, the end result is taking recommendations to the State Board of Education and then getting a list of high quality instructional materials at the lowest cost in the nation. So that's definitely a benefit to the districts and schools in North Carolina, is having materials on this list, because they do know that it will be at the lowest cost available. And also they know that the materials have been vetted by their peers who are in the classroom, who are teaching to these standards that we're looking at for alignment, and that they would be suitable for the grade level, the instructional level, as well as being appropriate for those students who may be in the Exceptional Children's Program or those who are English language learners. So there would be a lot of benefits to our districts and schools for the list that's provided based on this process. Benefits to the publishers, of course, would be the high profile in the state where the titles are placed on the list, and then those districts and schools are encouraged to look at those lists and to purchase from those lists. Also, an advantage is that our textbook warehouse does centralized purchasing as well as shipping in the event that there are print materials, but they do handle the purchasing. So that makes it an easy kind of like one-stop shop. As you may know, we have a publisher's registry in North Carolina, and publishers must be enrolled in the publisher's registry to be able to participate in our adoption process. We do caution publishers, however, against using undue pressure toward any member of the State Board of Education, any member of the Textbook Commission, any of our teachers that are working as textbook evaluation advisors, and of course, any of the DPI staff. So by undue pressure, of course, we're talking about any type of personal contact that would be used to sway someone to select a particular book, a particular series of books, anything that's under consideration for adoption. So if there's any personal contact to try to convince someone to adopt specific materials, that would be considered undue pressure. However, undue pressure does not include social contact, and those presentations or written communication to the commission for reconsideration or for any type of clarification. So we do have those who are involved with the process, and it might not always be on the end where you all are participating if you do participate in the adoption process. So there are a lot of things that are in place prior to that and things that have been put in place in the past. So the General Assembly is involved because they allocate the textbook funding that's allotted to the districts, and they pass laws that govern our textbook adoption process. The governor is involved because the governor appoints the State Board of Education members, and we know that this process is run through the State Board of Education as well as DPI. And the governor also appoints the textbook commission members. And the textbook commission members are those teachers and principals and parents who actually do the evaluating and make the recommendations to the State Board. Our state superintendent provides the governor with recommendations for members for the textbook commission and also assigns staff like myself from the Department of Public Instruction to manage the adoption process under their direction and to assist the textbook commissioners. Our State Board of Education, they select and adopt the textbooks, and that's in our general statutes, and they adopt their own state board policies that govern the textbook adoption process. So we have general statutes as well as state board policies that govern this process. The Textbook Commission is primarily responsible for the evaluation of any bid materials that come to the agency as a part of this process. And then there are other duties and responsibilities that are explained in the general statutes and the state board policies. The Textbook Commission consists of 23 members, and as I mentioned before, these are teachers, principals, parents, and then there's always one local superintendent that's on the commission. Also, I would mention that the textbook commissioners are the ones who make the selections of the advisors who will assist with the evaluation. So if we talk about the textbook evaluation advisors, they assist the commissioners with the evaluation of materials. They will vary by adoption depending on the content area. Of course, you would have during times where there are elementary grade levels that are under adoption, you may have some teachers that could participate in various years. But for the most part, for this one is basically 9-12 mathematics and CTE. So we have high school teachers who will be participating and maybe some middle school teachers. So that's just going to vary based on past adoptions and this current one. So it just depends on the teachers and what they're assigned to. The teachers work under the direction of the textbook commissioners because the textbook commissioners in the end make the final evaluation and recommendation to the state board. But they do look for teachers who are certified in the area under evaluation. And again, for this time, it would be 9-12 mathematics and CTE. They also try to make sure that these are teachers who are currently in the classroom teaching. That is what the preference is, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And then, of course, we have publishers, and those, of course, are our companies or providers of the textbooks and the instruction materials who will participate in this process. And we're always thankful for your participation whenever we do have an adoption. And publishers, again, must be registered on the NC Publishers Registry in order to receive the information and communication that goes out through our listservs about submission, evaluation, and adoption. Those of you who may not be familiar, the website has information for publishers, and on that page you can also find the place where there's a link to the form to sign up to be on the Publishers Registry. It also has a listing of the Publishers Registry so that you're able to see all the publishers who may be listed as well as yourself. The NCDPI staff, currently the Digital Teaching and Learning Division and the Standards Curriculum Instruction staff are those who are participating. We assist, of course, with the process, so that helps out our state superintendent, it helps out our State Board of Education, and also providing support to the commissioners. The Standards Curriculum and Instruction staff provide training for the commissioners on the various content areas, on the standards, as well as the criteria sheets. And I also, and myself personally, provide the communication to the publishers on the Publishers Registry and collaborate with the textbook warehouse staff. So that's just a quick overview of those who are involved and how they're involved in the process. And it's always good to know, because the process is a seamless process, but there's a lot that goes on outside of the process itself. I mentioned before that this process has guidelines and parameters and information that comes from general statutes and State Board of Education policies. So you can see here a listing of the numbers for the general statutes and for the State Board policies. These are available on the DPI site for textbook adoption, as well as the legislative site and the State Board of Education site. So you have lots of ways that you can review or look at these particular statutes and policies. So in continuing on with discussing the textbook adoption process, the way that this pretty much flows each time we have or start a new process is that our content consultants develop the criteria that will be used for evaluation and selection. That criteria is placed in the draft of the invitation that's developed, and it also in the invitation includes procedures that the publishers must follow. It includes a timeline for submission for all things such as the bids and the samples. And then it also has that criteria that the content consultants develop as a part of the invitation itself. The State Board of Education and the legal counsel supporting the State Board, they approve the invitation, and then that got distributed through the Publishers Registry to use. That's kind of what happens prior to the invitation coming to you for your use to participate in our program. The textbook commissioners then select those advisors and the advisors will check for alignment to standards. They will look at the quality criteria and check for alignment to that as well. And the advisors will definitely help the commissioners, because they will do those things as well and then make some recommendations to the textbook commissioners. But the textbook commissioners will do their own review, they will do have their own thoughts about materials, and then they will be the ones who come up with the recommended list of titles to take to the State Board. So once they take those to the State Board, then the State Board makes the final decision about the list of approved textbooks. And then from that part of the process, contracts are completed and we get resources and materials on our state adopted list for our schools. Throughout this process, our State Board members, our commission members, our teacher advisors, DPI staff, we're all held to the highest of the standards of conduct. And Throughout the process, we all try to demonstrate the highest level of personal conduct and avoiding anything that may be actual or perceived as a conflict of interest. We also need to, as staff members and members of the commission and state board, avoid any type of solicitation or accepting anything that may seem like a promise of a favor or reward. So we do ask that publishers on your end, there's no undue pressure, and then on our end, we maintain the high standards of conduct. So all of this is just preliminary information, hopefully to help you understand a little bit about the background of our textbook adoption process for those of you who may be new to considering participating in North Carolina. And for those of you who may not be new, then based on the fact that we did not have an adoption in 2020, then this is just a refresher for you. Let's move forward and talk about the bid submission process. So this is where we'll talk about that new NC site for publishers as well. So new this year, due to some of the limitations based on the COVID-19, the pandemic, and also social distancing and trying to be safe and healthy, during the time that we have been in a different modality of meeting, we have developed at DPI an NC site for publishers, which is a Google site that we will be using for publishers to submit their bids and submit materials. The request for bid identification numbers is going to be done by completing a Google form, and that link will be provided to you after this meeting through the NC Publishers Registry. So you will get that link. And then once you submit your request for bid identification numbers, you will receive access information based on information you put in the form, access information for the NC site for publishers. Once you have access to that site, you'll be able to go into the site and download the cost proposal form, as well as any other documents that are necessary for you to participate in the process. Then you will be able to return to that site to submit your bid proposal, and then you will also submit bid samples for evaluation through the site. Now, I will explain to you a little bit later on that even though you're submitting bid samples electronically through the site, you are going to have to also submit the official DPI sample to our textbook warehouse. If you have print materials, those would need to be in print form. And then if you have electronic materials, those would need to be, as in the past, for our textbook warehouse official copy, on a list with access information and login information. So that part will still be the same. So there's two parts to your bid samples, and then there's also going to be two parts to the bid proposal. So both hard copy versions as well as electronic versions. All right, so if we look at requesting bid identification number, each submission that you are wanting to have considered for adoption is going to require an identification number that will be issued by DPI. So the Google form will be used for you to request identification numbers. And at the time when you submit the form, you would indicate how many you would need. If you're trying to do some submissions for math, there's a place for you to indicate the number for math, a place for you to indicate the number you may want for social, not social studies, but a place for you to indicate the number that you would need for CTE. So math and CTE, and you can do both or you can do one. So it's not a required field. It's left open so that you could choose either or both. So that'll be available in the Google form. I'll explain a little bit more about the bid identification numbers because some of you may be thinking, well, what if after I submit that form, I change my mind and I don't want to submit as many or I want to submit more? So we'll discuss that a little bit more when I explain the bid identification numbers to you. All right, again, the link for the form to request your ID numbers will be provided in a message through the Publishers Registry, so you'll receive that after the meeting today. So if we go into a deeper discussion about requesting bid identification numbers. So this is really important because all of your materials that you are submitting are going to require a bid identification number. That is how commissioners and teachers will identify your materials and be able to evaluate them and correctly put in their information for their comments and their thoughts and their recommendations about your materials. It's based on the bid number. So I cannot emphasize to you enough how important it is that that bid number is a part of all of your submissions for those materials. So the way that the bid identification numbers work, they are alphanumeric in nature. And as you can see from the example here, 3 letters at the front and then 4 numbers currently at the back. So the 3 letters will designate the company's name, and that will be chosen by DPI. If the company has 3 words in their name, it may be the first letter from each one. If not, then those letters will be randomly chosen by DPI and put at the front, and then numbers will be put at the back. The way that the numbers will work is that the 1100 series of numbers will be the base number for bids for mathematics materials and resources. And the 3000 series of numbers will be the base number for all bids for career and technical education, or CTE. So let's look at this example of assignment of bid numbers based on a request. So we have any book publisher that requests 6 identification numbers for mathematics materials. So DPI would assign those 6 numbers based on 3 letters from the name. So in this case, ABP, because there's 3 words in the name and 1 letter chosen from each word. So ABP, notice starting with the series base 1100, and then DPI would assign ABP 1101, ABP 1102, 03, 04, 05. So that would be the 6 bid numbers or bid identification numbers that you would receive back from DPI based on your request. So let's suppose that any book publisher said, okay, I requested 6 numbers when I filled out my form, but we think we have 4 more things that we want to submit in this adoption this year. Well, no problem, because once you receive your numbers, all you have to do is to continue on, is to add 1 number and continue for as many more bid numbers as you would like. DPI has assigned you the original numbers, but you have the ability to continue to add numbers, and then you can also change your mind if you don't want to submit as many. So in this example, where more bid numbers are added, notice that 1 is added in increments to get each successive number. So the DPI list that was sent back to any book publisher ended with ABP 1105. So if this company wanted to add 4 more bids, they would add ABP 1106, 1107, 1108, and 1109. So this would give them the 4 additional numbers that they would require. And so now they have a total of 10 bid numbers that they can work with for their resources that they're submitting. So once this happens, again, the company can decide to use all 10 of those bid numbers. The company could decide to add 5, 7 more if they like, or they can decide that they're only going to submit 4 bids. This is really flexible. The ask is that you just request your initial numbers from DPI so that we have a record of your request and of the numbers that you will begin with. And then after that, you do have a little bit of flexibility in continuing to add numbers as needed. The same thing would be true of CTE. So in this example, Career First Company is requesting 4 numbers, 4 identification numbers for CTE materials. And again, DPI would determine the alpha part of the number, And in this case, again, CFC would be the choice because there's a letter in each of the three parts of their name. So CFC, and the base number here for CTE is 3,000. So CFC 3,000, 3,001, 3,002, and 3,003. So those would be the four bid ID numbers that DPI would assign to Career First Company. Now, again, Career First Company may decide we want to submit more resources, or they may decide we want to submit fewer resources, or they may decide we don't want to submit anything at all. So that is a decision that the company would make prior to the next phase, which would be actually completing the bid proposal or the cost proposal to go along in the bid proposal. So I can pause at this point because I've covered a lot, and we will be moving on to something else. I can pause to see if anyone has any questions about the bid identification numbers. Any questions about the bid identification numbers? Okay, I'm just checking just to be sure. I don't see anything in the chat. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat. So we'll go ahead and move on. All right, so the next topic is going to be the cost proposal form, and we'll take a look at an example. Those of you who have participated in our process in the past, you may be familiar with this form to know that this is actually an Excel spreadsheet. And the purpose of this form is to enter bid information and prices for any textbooks that you may be putting into bid for consideration for adoption. So this particular form will be used to submit textbooks with prices, but you will also need to submit a copy without prices. Also asking that you save the spreadsheet with the specific naming convention. So you would want to use your company name and then the words cost proposal and then 2021. So this is, of course, to help make it easy to identify your files and to identify the files of everyone when we have all the files together. So this would be the naming convention. This information is going to be in the instructions in the cost proposal form that you will receive access to once you are able to get into the NC site for publishers. I do want to stop and mention at this point some of the submission parameters. The textbooks are going to be able to be submitted at whatever grade level or course the publisher deems appropriate. That is not something that DPI decides. It's not something that the textbook commissioner decides. The publisher makes that decision about what grade level of course is appropriate. The cost proposals must clearly state whatever the grade level or course it is that publishers would like for the materials to be reviewed for. So that has to be very clear because that's what the commissioners and the advisors will go by. Whatever is in that spreadsheet is what they will use. So it must be very clear with what you're actually saying it should be reviewed for. So if it's a specific course in CTE or if it's NC Math 1 in the mathematics area, then there's a place in the spreadsheet for that, and that's what you would put in there. They're only going to be evaluated for what's there, what is specified in that sheet. Textbook commissioners and advisors will not try to assume anything. It'll be whatever is in the sheet. So you have to be very clear about what courses or grade levels it should be your resources should be reviewed for. This information is also on pages 1 and 2 of the invitation where the submission parameters are. So I highly encourage you to be sure to read those pages, read, reread, use them as a reference, and continue to go back to those pages so that you can be sure that you're having the information that you need to put your bid together in the best way. This is an example of what the instructions will look like on that cost proposal form spreadsheet. So this will be one of the sheets or tabs in the Excel spreadsheet. So notice here, this has the information about the naming convention that I just mentioned, but then it also gives details about your bid submissions, asking you to be sure that you use the 13-digit ISBN, as well as making sure that you list components that also have the 13-digit ISBN with those as well. So it gives you some examples of some particulars, and then there's information if you have enrichment materials and accompanying student materials. So all the information that you see here will be in the cost proposal form / spreadsheet. So you'll be able to see those things in that form. Also keep in mind, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, but they must be written. When you are reviewing this invitation, I would encourage you to go through the invitation, look through all the information from the beginning to the end, from the submission parameters through the criteria, through the bid sample information, as well as the attachments. Review all of that information prior to the end of the window for submitting written questions, because that is your opportunity to be able to ask questions that you have for clarity or for information that you feel like you need to be able to submit your bid. So please adhere to that. And I also would say from past experience with adoptions, I do know that sometimes in companies that different people are involved in different parts of the process. There may be somebody that's involved with the bids and then somebody else that's involved with the samples. I would encourage you to make sure that anyone who's going to be involved in this process has familiarity with the guidelines, the parameters, and the details in the invitation, because that is the guiding document. And all of those submission parameters and guidelines must be adhered to, as well as the deadlines met, in order for you to participate in the process. So this will be available for you in the spreadsheet. This is what the spreadsheet is going to look like. You're going to actually have several sheets or several tabs in the workbook. This will be the one that is considered the bid sheet or the cost proposal bid form. Okay, so this is where you're going to type in that bid number that's assigned to you by DPI, and then the title of whatever the resource is, the grade level of course, the ISBN number, the publisher name, and so on and so forth. So you can see all the details that are explained here, as well as the NIMAS compliance, as well as the cost information. So remember, you're going to create a form that has prices, and then you'll submit a form that does not have prices. So you'll be able to submit both. But this is what this form looks like in terms of filling in the information. And what you see is the bid itself is bolded, and then components of that bid would be underneath. Now, this is an example only. This is not an end-all, be-all, how yours has to look. This is just an example to have a talking point to show you how the form might look when it's filled out with a major bid and then the components that go along with that. Now, we also have forms for accompanying student materials, or ASM, and enrichment materials, which are considered EM. So those forms are on separate tabs. They're not on the same tab with your form that I just showed you. They're a separate tab, and it's clearly marked which one is ASM, which one is EM. So this is where you would list those particular materials that you will be offering, and the ratio that you will be offering them. They would go in these forms. Now, we often get the question from publishers about, do these things need to be submitted during the evaluation period? And the response is something like, if these things are materials that need to be a part of your bid in order for your bid to meet the criteria and meet the standards alignment, you would include it so that it would be a part of the bid, okay? But if it is not like a major component and is not necessary for your bid to be standards aligned based on the percentage in the criteria sheet and aligned to the evaluation criteria, you would submit it on these sheets, and then we would have an awareness of what these things would be in the future when we actually get the adopted list. So this is just what the form for EM looks like. And again, you can see that there are ratios outlined here for that as well. All right, so again, I'm going to pause for just a minute because I've gone through the cost proposal form, and we've taken a look at what that looks like as an example, and then the other forms for ASM and EM. And I will pause here just for a moment to see if there are any questions from anyone. Okay, so someone has asked in the chat if they need to inform North Carolina if you add more numbers. The answer to that is no, because we will be able to see it when you submit your bid proposal. You will have all your numbers listed there. You just need to make sure that when you add the numbers that you stay in sync with what was provided by DPI and just continue to add one to get consecutive bid numbers. That would be the only requirement. Are there any other questions? We're good? Everybody's okay? All right, so let's keep moving along. And now let's talk about submission parameters and bid samples. So this information is going to be important because this will actually involve what you're going to be doing to submit your bid as well as to submit your samples. It will not be exhaustive information, but hopefully this will be enough information to make it very clear to you what you would have to do, or to at least be able to submit written questions if you're not clear about what you would need to do. So in taking a look at submission parameters, we first want to talk about those things that are on pages 1 and 2. And again, it's the publisher's responsibility to be sure that the submission is complete, that the submission is accurate, and that everything is correctly identified in the way that you want it to be identified for evaluation. So definitely make sure you check and double check your submission before you send it in or submit it to DPI. Also, you will need to provide sample textbook materials, and that'll be according to the schedule. If you've had the opportunity to look at your invitation, you know that there's a tentative schedule within the invitation. And in that tentative schedule are all the dates and deadlines that you need to meet to start the process, to get the things that you need to have your bid information, your bid proposal, and then information and details about bid samples and how those would be submitted as well. So definitely you need to make sure that you're looking at those things during the window of time when you can ask questions, so that if you're not clear about something, that you do have the opportunity to submit that as a written question, because that will be your opportunity to get some responses back for clarification. Also, a part of our submission parameters, those materials that some of you may be providing, if you are providing print materials, again, because of the situation that we're in with the pandemic, we are asking that if you have print materials, instead of boxing those print materials up and shipping those print materials off for the evaluation, we are going to be asking you to provide those print materials in PDF format, and that making sure that these electronic versions that you're sending as PDF are complete and that they're the same format and the same content as your print versions. So again, if you have print materials that you want to be evaluated in this process, we ask that you provide those print materials as electronic PDFs, and making sure that they're complete, they have the same format and the same content as the print versions. All right, we will also need links and or access information for the electronic materials that you're providing in place of the print materials. And then, of course, all your materials need to have the DPI identification number that's provided, or those that you created based on what DPI provided. So that is for print materials. We also recognize that we will probably receive technology-based programs and non-print materials. So for those types of resources, then you will need to provide access information for those materials based on the schedule. Again, looking at the tentative schedule to see when all of that information is due. You'll also need to make sure that this access information contains the bid ID number so that commissioners and advisors and DPI staff know what goes with what, so that the right things are being reviewed. So any access information that you send must include the DPI identification number. In previous years, the invitation asked for publishers to provide navigation instructions, but there were many times where the navigation instructions were not provided, and during the evaluation, both commissioners and advisors had some difficulty trying to figure out how to access things to check for the alignment to standards and or the alignment to the quality criteria. So starting this year, we're asking explicitly that you provide navigation instructions for any of your materials that may be technology-based and non-print. So those navigation instructions should basically say, this is how you navigate the resource, the particular resource that you're wanting to have reviewed or evaluated by the commissioners and the teachers through your online platform. Those navigation instructions can be provided as a video or a screencast, but that should be no longer than 10 minutes in length. You do have the option of also providing electronic document or only providing an electronic document. But I will tell you that commissioners have indicated that they prefer a video or screencast when at all possible. Also, a link for access to that video or screencast if you choose to submit that, or the electronic document with the navigation instructions. That is going to be submitted through the NC site for publishers according to the schedule in the invitation. And also according to the bid proposal guidelines. So the access instructions need to be working through October 30th of this year. That will give the commissioners and DPI and the state board the opportunity to complete the entire process from the evaluation, the deliberations, and then the state board consideration for adoption. So hopefully by that point, October 30th, we would already have taken things to the board and we would be looking for their approval of the recommended list. The dates you will be able to see in the invitation in the tentative schedule for what that looks like. All right, so in talking about the submissions, we will also talk about bid samples and some of the particulars for the bid samples, but I'm going to stop for just a minute and see if anybody had any questions about the submission parameters for print, non-print, and then the navigation instructions for non-print. Okay, so I'm just checking the chat to see if there are any questions there. All right, so let's see what I see here. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the bid samples and go through a few of the details that will be a little bit different because we're using the NC site for publishers. And again, also giving you the opportunity to ask questions if you have about the bid samples. The biggest difference for the bid samples is that there will be a way to submit your samples that are electronic PDFs for print materials, and then of course your digital resources through the NC site for publishers. So again, using that modality due to the circumstances that we're in with the pandemic. This is linked to your request of your identification numbers. You must submit that request in order to receive the information that will get you or the designated person into the NC site for publishers. So that request for bid identification numbers is the kickoff for being able to access the NC site for publishers. I do want to mention specifically that as far as the official DPI samples, those samples will still be submitted the usual customary way that have been submitted in the past. So official samples of print materials would be submitted to the textbook warehouse in print, all right? And then those technology-based or non-print samples, again, as before in the past, they would need to be included on a list, and you would need to have bid identification number, login information, access information, all of the same types of things that you would have for print materials. You would also need to have them for the digital resources or the non-print resources. Those official samples must be shipped or mailed as explained in the 2021 invitation. So it gives you the particulars of what needs to go on, how the resources need to be labeled, and how you would, and the address and everything, and who you would address to, and the actual physical address that you would send those things to as well. So that information and those details are provided in the invitation. So again, very helpful to go through the invitation and to look for these specific things to be sure you understand prior to the end of the window for the written questions. So bid sample materials are going to be submitted electronically through the NC site for publishers. And that window of time will be no earlier than May 10th and no later than May 17th. That is the same deadline for the official samples for the textbook warehouse, no earlier than May 10th and no later than May 17th. So giving you a window of time to be sure that you can get the materials there as requested and required if you're interested in participating in the process, so that the bid samples can be at the textbook warehouse if it's part of the official sample, and in the electronic or in the platform if they're going to be submitted electronically. So this is outlined in the tentative schedule as well as on the pages of the invitation. This is just a reminder to you that these two things need to happen at the same time, both no earlier than May 10th and no later than May 17th, meaning that those samples for the warehouse should arrive no later than the 17th of May. And then if you're submitting your things through the NC site for publishers, they should be submitted there no later than May 17th. All right, so want to go through some important reminders for you. So there's a lot of information and detail in the invitation. There's a lot. Luckily, we have a table of contents, we have a list of attachments, but it's still a lot because it's guidelines and parameters. So it's all the specifics and all the details and all the dates of everything. So I want to make sure that I make an awareness or kind of emphasize those things that are the key things that should kind of bubble up to the top. So starting with the written questions. This will mark the period of time when hopefully you will have had time to consider this presentation today and any materials that you have access to, such as the invitation, that you would have the opportunity to submit a written question or written questions to receive a response. And the way that that works is there's a deadline for everyone, and that would be March the 22nd by 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Those written questions are going to go to our procurement office, to Mashonda Sutherland, and her email is here as well as in the invitation. So by 2 p.m. on March 22nd, you should have emailed any questions that you have for this process to Mashonda Sutherland. Now, what we will do is we will take those questions and we will make sure that the appropriate people are answering those questions. So if you have a question that is pertaining to standards, we would get some of our colleagues in standards curriculum instruction to respond. If you have some questions dealing with funding and finance, we would reach out to our colleagues in that division, in those sections, to provide us with information for that. If it's something that's a bit of a legal question, then we would reach out to legal counsel. I, of course, will try to answer those questions pertaining to the actual process itself. And then there may be some questions that you may have to ask your own legal counsel. There may be some things that are not something that we can give you the end-all be-all answer for, but it may be a business decision or legal decision. So we would definitely let you know that in the response if that's the case. But at any rate, you will have until that period of time. So, starting from now until the 22nd, that's your time to go through your invitation and to look at anything you want to in this presentation, anything about the cost proposal form that's here in this presentation, and then also going back to look at those things that you've already been provided. So the invitation, the website, all of those things. The question and answer period is really critical, because if there are things that you're not understanding today, but you just might not realize that you don't understand it well enough, that's your opportunity to get that clarification. So I can't emphasize to you enough how important it is for you to go through that invitation before the 22nd so that you can make sure that you have your questions answered. Those of you who may submit your request for your bid IDs and you start filling in your cost proposal, you may have some questions that come up about that. So it's just the right time to go through things so that you are able to ask questions before that deadline ends. Okay, so the next thing would be the due date for your bid submissions. The bid submissions are going to be due April 30th, again, by 2 p.m. Now, I mentioned to you earlier, the bid proposals are going to be submitted 2 ways, and this is all in the bid proposal, on the bid proposal page in the invitation. The bid proposals will be submitted electronically, and the invitation lists what does it mean when it says bid proposal. So it gives you a list of all of those things that are considered a part of the bid proposal. So the electronic versions will be submitted through the NC site for publishers. In addition to that, you will also submit your bid proposal by hard copy in the mail. So the address and everything that you will use for that is in the invitation on the page that provides the information about bid proposals. So you'll be submitting an electronic copy and a hard copy. Now, remember, the hard copy will need to be submitted and received by April 30th, 2 p.m. So you must make sure that it is going to reach DPI by that day, by that time. And we're looking for both the electronic and the hard copy. All right. So again, I can't emphasize enough, must be submitted and received by 2 p.m. on that due date. All right, another important date is May 17th. I talked about the bid samples a little bit earlier. That is the due date for the bid samples, your electronic bid samples and your correlations. So those documents that you create to show the correlation between your resource and the DPI standards, that would be the document that you also submit with your bid samples so that the advisors and the commissioners are able to see what you're saying is lined up. What you're saying is there's a correlation between them, so that if you're saying that you're covering the standards 80% or you're covering them 100%, that should be clear in your correlation document, because all of that should be included, how that lines up or how that matches up. I would also say that you should definitely be sure that you have your format for how you want to address the correlation. DPI does not have a form or format that we provide publishers for the correlation document. So that is up to you but you have to submit a correlation document. So that must be submitted with your, for sure, with your samples that are electronic, and also with your official samples that will go to our textbook warehouse. Okay. So let's talk about evaluation. So for the first time, North Carolina is going to try to conduct an evaluation where the advisors will do this, the advisors and the commissioners will do this work remotely through a virtual platform. Those of you who have joined us for meetings in the past know that we use WebEx. That's what has been used for commission meetings. So that is what we will be using for evaluation week as well. So important to note that June 13th will be the day. If publishers are interested in presenting to the commissioners, you will have the opportunity for a specific amount of time to present to the commissioners through WebEx. This meeting, of course, will be an open meeting, and so you will be given your time frame, and once your time frame is up, then your presentation will cease. You will also need to be prepared to share your screen, and if you have things that you need to share, you would be responsible for sharing your screen and making sure that you're showing whatever things you feel you need to show based on your screen. Now, DPI does not put out a list of things that you have to say at these presentations, but I do know that in the past it's been helpful for, when publishers have shared information about navigation and things like that, that help the commissioners understand how to review the materials that are being presented for adoption consideration. As we get closer to the June 13th date, communication would go out to ask which publishers out of those who have submitted requests for bids and actual bid submissions would be interested in presenting to the commissioners. And then once you respond back, you would get your time slot. And then of course, you would have access to an agenda so that you would know when you're presenting. So it's optional. You do not have to present. It is up to you, but that information will be forthcoming as we continue through the process. Now, June 14th through the 18th, those are the actual dates for evaluation week. That is during the time that the teachers or the advisors will be working with the commissioners. The 14th through the 18th is the window of time we normally have as far as the number of days for evaluation. And someone has asked me, is June 13th a Sunday? And the answer to that is yes. We usually try to have the publisher presentations prior to the work with the advisors and assisting them in their evaluations of the materials. So we usually have that the day before the actual evaluation week starts. So yes, that would be on a Sunday. All right. So during that time, the 14th through the 18th, the commissioners will be working with the advisors to support if they have questions. The advisors will be doing their own evaluations during that time, and then the commissioners and the advisors will have a debriefing session after they have the opportunity to review all of the materials or resources for that particular course or grade level. That is the structure of how it will work all that week. And although we have these tentative dates in the schedule, the number of days that the advisors are there depends on the number and the amount of materials that are received for each course. So depending, the math group, they may not be there as long. They have fewer courses than CTE, or if there's a lot of resources that are submitted for all the math courses, they may be there just as long as CTE. It just depends on what the submissions are. But once the submissions are in, the commissioners will know more about how many days it will take for each course or for each level. All right. So I want to stop and see if there are any other questions besides about June 13th, if there are any other questions that you all may have. Let's see. All right, so someone has pointed out that in the invitation that it indicates that the U.S. Postal Service doesn't deliver any mail, U.S. Postal Express certified priority overnight on a set delivery schedule to the office. So the question is, should we send to your address via UPS or FedEx then? So the response to that would be, and remember, you should be submitting these questions during the written question period so that everybody can benefit from the responses. And those are the responses that DPI will be bound to, or those responses that we give in the written feedback based on the question. So please submit this question as a written question to Mashonda so that we can get it in our questions document. So the response to that would be, you can send UPS, you can send FedEx. If you decide to send it through the U.S. Postal Service, do know that there may be a delay in getting that mail, and it may not make it on time. And what we will go by is whenever that package gets to DPI, if it's by the deadline, if it's by the 2 p.m. deadline and by the date deadline. So you have to go with the way that you feel like is the surest way to be sure that DPI is going to receive the materials, or you have to mail it out far enough so that DPI can get the materials by the correct date and time. So that's truly up to you, but just keep that in mind. There's a question about hand delivering a bid. That one I'm definitely going to say submit through the written questions, because I would want to consult with the procurement office before giving a response to that one. That's a good question though. All right. Any other questions? I'm trying to scan chat real quick. Okay. All right. So I don't see any others at this point. So let's continue. Just a few more guidelines and parameters, and then wanting to talk about the invitation a little bit. You do know already that DPI has a textbook adoption webpage, and this is the landing site for that particular, the materials for textbook adoption. Do know that we just had a migration yesterday to a new version of the platform that we use for our website. So if things seem out of whack and you can't find things, please send an email to the NC Textbooks email address that you've received from me that's in the invitation. Please send an email there and just let me know so that I can focus in on that particular aspect of the web page. But we did have a migration yesterday, so hopefully things are still intact, but if not, do know that we will be working on making sure that we get everything so that it is accessible as it was before the migration. But this is where you would go, and you're able to find things about the textbook adoption process. There's a page called Information for Publishers. There's an NC Publishers Registry. There are pages dedicated to the textbook commission meetings. So anything textbooks, you should be able to find on these pages. All right, again, I want to emphasize that we have this new NC site for publishers. It is a Google site. The primary purpose of this site is giving you the ability to upload information, upload documents, upload details and links and access information so that we have things electronically, and so that we're able to conduct the review with advisors and commissioners in a virtual way. Notice here, again, reiterating that you're going to request your bid ID numbers. Once you request those numbers, the appropriate people that you indicate will receive information about the NC site for publishers. And in that site, you'll be able to access the invitation, which you've received that copy. I think I've sent that out a couple of times to you. So you've received it on the Publishers Registry. You can get to it on the web page, and then you will also have access to it in the NC site for publishers. There you will also have access to the cost proposal form and other documents that may be required for a bid proposal. You'll be able to submit your bid proposal and then submit the bid sample materials and correlations, keeping in mind that for both the bid proposal and the samples, that you will do both electronic and hard copy. The only hard copy bid sample is the official DPI sample that goes to the textbook warehouse. Also, there are Naming conventions, we've mentioned before with the cost proposal form that you would name it by your company name, cost proposal, and then 2021. So that'll be for your cost proposal. And then for your sample submissions of your bid samples, looking for that bid ID number in the name of the file, as well as the company name, the title, and the course. So we'll be receiving hopefully a lot of files, and we want to have this naming convention to ensure that we're able to keep the appropriate files together for the review process or for the evaluation process. So it would be very helpful to us if the naming conventions that are outlined here would be utilized for that purpose. So someone is asking if they are able to, how can they find out if they are already on the NC Publishers Registry? You would go to the web page for textbook adoption and look for NC Publishers Registry. And when you click on that, you have two options. You can look at the table as it is on the web page, and there's several pages of it. So you would have to click next, 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 next to see all of the pages. Or you can download it as a CSV file and review it as a document. But that is on the webpage on textbook adoption. The navigation would say NC Publishers Registry, and you would be able to see it there. So someone is asking, what if the package arrives before the 10th? So again, submit all of these questions through the written questions forum. We've not necessarily had to deal with packages coming before, so I would definitely want to answer that one through the written part of the process, again, so that I can check with my colleagues in procurement to make sure that I'm providing the best answer for you, okay? So please be sure to submit all of the questions that you're asking today as written questions. All right, so let's see, I don't see any other questions, so we'll go on. And the next thing that we want to take a look at is the invitation itself. So as you know, the invitation has a table of contents that outlines all the topics and all the information that is in that document that's important for you to know in creating a bid submission, as well as preparing samples. And then for those of you that may have materials that are adopted, it also will have the contract, surety bond information, and things like that. So it's a very important document. It has everything that you need to participate in this process in North Carolina. So looking at just some a high-level overview, you know that you have introduction and requirements. You also have the information about the bid proposal. Those are some extremely important pages because they detail, there's bulleted detail about each thing. The submission parameters is numbered detail, the bid proposal, the sample information, all of that is detailed, and it's in greater detail than what I'm going through here. So the information, the invitation, along with the tentative schedule that's in the invitation, will give you all the details that you need to know about deadlines, timelines, and exactly what is expected. So again, I encourage you, look through those particulars while the Q&A session is open, so that if you do have any questions or you are unsure about something, that you can submit that question and receive a written response to help bring clarity to that for you. So again, encouraging you to read the entire invitation and encouraging you to ensure that anybody who will be a part of the process, whether it's dealing with contracts, whether it's dealing with bid samples, whether it's dealing with the official samples, or just the bid proposal, please be sure that they're aware of these guidelines in this document so that they are following them and won't be dismissed from the process for not meeting guidelines and things. And I'll try not to go over it too many times, but it's just extremely important that you're aware of how important that is in doing your submissions. So coming to a part where we talk about blackout periods. And if you look through the invitation, there are two types of blackout periods. The first type of blackout period deals with the State Board, DPI, the Textbook Commission. And during the times, starting back on the day when the State Board actually approved the invitation, which was March the 4th, during that time, the commission, the members of the commission, the State Board, and DPI are not allowed to meet privately with any representatives from the publishing company. And this is, of course, to discuss details concerning anything that you would have under consideration for bid. So, we understand that you're already doing business in districts and schools, and that you have resources out there, that you're already working with districts and schools. So those things are important, that you provide support for those things. But we also ask that at this time, anything you decide to put on the bid submission list, those are the things that you do not want to meet privately and have discussions with State Board members, commission members, DPI. And that period goes all the way through the State Board adopts the list of textbooks that are recommended by the Textbook Commission. The other type of blackout is for sampling promotion. So this is more about having things at meetings and having things at workshops and seminars and things like that. So the time frame for this one would be, again, from March 4th, which is when the State Board approved, until the day after the commission have their evaluation sessions with the teachers. And all of these dates are in your invitation. So during that time, you would want to make sure that you're not out promoting any of these materials that you have on your bid list under consideration for adoption at displays at conferences, at workshops, at seminars, at any type of activity in North Carolina. You should not have materials that are on your bid submission on display or out there for discussion at conferences and meetings and things like that. All right, and so again, emphasizing that you should read the entire 2021 invitation and make sure that others who are going to be involved in your bid submission are aware of what is in this invitation. Also getting them aware of it during the question and answer period, during the written question period, so that if they come across questions on their part, that you're able to submit the questions in our process during their part as well. So I don't know, again, these are the things that are in the invitation. I'm just emphasizing them: the introduction requirements, the tentative schedule, the bid proposal information, and there are quite a few other things. Information about Form B and Form M and what you need to do with that in terms of the official samples. Also certain attachments that need to be included with the bid proposal. So all of the details that you need are outlined in the invitation. So I'll pause again. I'll also show this slide. This is showing that in the invitation, you would have the listing of the content areas. So it would show the courses for math, and this is a snippet of the courses for CTE, as well as the instructional materials review criteria sheet. These are the criteria sheets that advisors and commissioners will use to determine the quality of the materials based on this criteria. They will, of course, use standards to be sure that there's alignment based on the percentage that is indicated in the instructional materials review criteria sheet. But then they will also use the criteria itself. So you need to be aware of how that works. What are the stipulations for if it doesn't meet the standards by a certain percentage? Typically, that would mean that that material would not move forward in a review. So it's critical that you have your correlation documents and also, make those available in the most exact way, and making sure they're correct and submitted with your bid samples, so that the commissioners and the teachers would be able to have access and see how you have things lined up. All right, so let's see if we have any questions. Let's see. And I have a few colleagues who are on the line as panelists, if they are able to scan the questions and see something that I've not been able to see because I have been presenting and trying to scroll. So if I've missed anything, I would ask one of those colleagues to speak so that they can highlight anything that I've missed. So I saw a question just come in, and it says, I viewed the publisher's registry and see my company listed there with 8 different direct contacts. However, my own contact information is not on there under my company. Do I still need to add myself to the list as I'm the new rep supporting NC? Also, some people listed here are no longer with the company. Should I ask to have them removed? If so, who would I reach out to for this? So the answer to that would be, if you are not on the list, then you would need to go to the website under information for publishers, and you would need to scroll down to where you see the link for the form to get added to the publisher's registry, and then you would add yourself to the list that way. It asks you specific questions in a Google form. You would fill that out, and then that information would be carried over to the registry that's on the website, as well as the listserv that's used for communication to the publisher's registry. If you see that there are people on the list who are no longer with the company, and you want to make that request, then you would just send an email to the NC textbooks at dpi.nc.gov email address and just give me the particulars of who it is that needs to be deleted, or if titles are changed or contact information has changed. You can send that to me in an email. Additions need to be done through the form, but then changes and updates can be done through an email through nctextbooks@dpi.nc.gov. Okay. And let's see, I'll ask my colleagues if they have seen any questions that I might have missed. I'm trying to scroll back now to see. Someone has asked, what quantity do you need for each print component samples? So for the official sample that is going to the warehouse, we only need one set of samples for the warehouse. For the electronic, the same is true, because this is going to be submitted electronically. The deal about quantity is when you're doing samples, you want to make sure that you submit for each different bid the components that are necessary for that bid to be reviewed when you're submitting that particular bid. So it'll be a Google form, you'll have upload abilities, and you just need to be sure that you're uploading all the components for that bid. So you'll have to fill out the form multiple times depending on how many bids you have. So for each bid, you would submit another response to the form, and you would include just one copy of everything that is asking for in the form. I hope that answers your question. Okay, I'm looking to see if either of my colleagues have seen anything that I've missed.
This is Commissioner Winkler. There are 2 questions about the blackout period.
I can hardly hear you. Can you say that again?
There are 2 questions about the blackout period.
Okay, can you read those questions? I don't see them right now.
Yes, what if a local school admin reaches out to the publishers during this time?
Can you read it again?
What if a school admin reaches out to the publisher during this time?
The specific thing about the blackout is you should not be communicating about things on the list for bid consideration. If they're reaching out to you about business that you're already doing, of course, you can continue conducting that type of business, but the specifics for the blackout is that there should be no communicating relative to anything that you put on your bid sheet to be considered for adoption in North Carolina.
And the second question is sort of like that. It's
discuss the product at the conference. Does that mean no conversations with individual districts and or administrators of a district?
So at the conference, again, if you're considering putting materials on the adopted list, those materials should not be promoted at a conference. So that would be a decision that you would have to make if you have things that you're trying to promote through a conference or through workshops and activities. Just know that based on our blackout policy, the things that you're submitting on your bid sheet should not be placed in that type of position where you're having them available for review and discussion. What you have to know is that teachers will be selected from across the state. And the idea is they should not be influenced. And many of our commissioners are teachers and principals. They should not be influenced because you're sampling or promoting something at a workshop or a conference, and you're also putting that same thing on a bid sheet. So that would be a conflict there, is if you had something. But if it's a question or if it's contact about other business that you're doing, we don't get into all of that. It's just specific to, if there are things that you have on the bid sheet, those are the things that are on blackout for sampling and promotion. And again, these are very good questions, so be sure to submit them in the written form to Mashonda Sutherland so that we can get them on the document where we have the written response that we'll be bound to. All right, Commissioner Linker, do you see anything else that I may have missed? Or do you have anything to add? Okay, I hear nothing. So let's go ahead and move on. We're getting close to the end of our time together. So the question is, what's next? So the next step that you would need to follow is, again, being very familiar with those guidelines and parameters in the invitation. So making sure that you're able to follow those guidelines and parameters, and that anybody who in the company would be involved as a part of the bid process, that they are also aware of those guidelines and parameters in the invitation. You need to determine the number of bid ID numbers that you want to request, but also knowing that if you request a certain number, you can add to or take away from what you receive from DPI. So there's flexibility in that. But your initial bid identification numbers should come from DPI, because we will determine those 3 letters and then put the base numbers and then add from there. Also, that you're adhering to those blackout period guidelines, and hopefully the responses to those questions made sense today. Again, I'm asking those who ask the questions to please be sure to submit them as written questions to Mashonda Sutherland as outlined in the invitation, so that we can give you the best answer in a written format, so that will be the response that we'll be bound to. And then, of course, meet all the due dates. So all the dates are outlined in the tentative schedule. And unless something happens that will require those dates to be changed, those are the dates that we will adhere to. And so if you do have questions about dates, I would say to please submit those questions in the written form so that those questions can be answered as well. You have a good window of time to be able to submit written questions. So I definitely say, please be sure that if there's anything that you don't have clarification on, that you submit those questions through that format, because once we close the written questions period, then we will not really be entertaining questions after that period. Usually we give this much time so that everybody will have time to look at the parameters and guidelines and to have conversation in your company with whomever you may need to have conversation with, so you can determine what things do you need to know to really have a great bid submission. And that's what we want you all to do. We want your bid submission to be the best that it can be, so that it's clear, that it has all the details and information that you need it to have. And so we promote this question and answer period so that you can be sure that you have what you need to make that happen. So well, at this time, I'd like to say thank you to those of you who are here on this meeting, who took the time out to join me, and to, it was a lot of time, it was a lot of explanation, and I appreciate the questions that you all have put forward. And someone has asked, is the Google site open now? It won't be open until we start assigning the bid numbers. And then once we communicate that information back to you, that is when the site will be officially open for everyone. You're very welcome. I appreciate all of you. I'm looking in the chat to see if there are any other questions, if anybody has anything else as far as questions are concerned. Well, I hope this information is helpful to you. And please do be sure, if you have any written questions, Mashonda Sutherland is a purchasing agent in our procurement office. Her email is here as well as in the invitation. So please make sure that you contact her. And for those of you who are asking questions about being able to send me information to delete from the Publishers Registry, please use the email address you see here under my name, nctextbooks@dpi.nc.gov. Someone has said thank you and for the presentation. You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. I hope all of you have a great weekend, and I'll be looking forward to your questions, your bid submissions, and your sample submissions. And I thank you for your time. Take care.